Okay, we're going to get started. Hey, welcome here. It's so great to have you. I am feeling it, okay? I feel your energy. I feel it returning to me as you've listened to this, and I just know that if you are here, there's something meant for you in this message. So, hold on tight. Let's go ahead and ground ourselves in our greatness. Today, my greatness really has been just taking time to stop myself. This is a very overwhelming point in the year for me. It's really hard for me to control myself. In December, November periods of time, there are a lot of triggers in there. There are a lot of childhood memories and things that go along with this timeline. And some of them are good, some of them are bad, but most of them, regardless of good or bad, right, because we don't even have that, most of them are triggering and super hard for me to process, hard for me to understand and acknowledge and just slow myself down when I get triggered. And so I really felt myself kind of spinning off the tracks this weekend. And luckily, my husband has gotten better at recognizing those moments and helping to call me back or help me to control in those times. And I think, that takes a lot of vulnerability, acceptance on his part that, hey, guess what? Sorry, you didn't marry the perfect person. Ugh, I know. None of us did. It's very unfortunate. But, continuing to have that conversation, making sure that he's aware that this is a triggering time for me, that it's hard for me to take control and really own these moments. And when he's clued into that, he can help me through those moments and not allow me to continue spinning and dodging and just going and going and going. So I think that's my great thing. I could feel it. I could feel it happening. I could feel the loss of control. I could feel all of it coming. And he did a great job of calling me back. I did a great job of spinning, but spinning in a controlled enough manner where we didn't do a bunch of things that couldn't be undone. So spinning looked like overspending at a store, and undoing it looked like just returning it, right? It's okay. You went a little crazy. That's okay. Let's walk it back. Let's return it because it wasn't everything that you thought it was. You just got caught up in the moment. And, that's just the reality of people accepting the wholeness of you accepting and not punishing that person, right? Because old Hanna, would have hid that, would have found ways to make it make sense, even though it didn't make any sense at all. Here's a great example. Some of the jeans that I bought this weekend were, to me, on sale. FOMO moment, oh no, we're gonna miss out. There's this big sale. And so I needed to stock up. There was just this feeling of no, stock. And today, those same jeans that were upwards of $20, right? And probably some of you are going, oh, wow, $20 for, that's not crazy. Right? It isn't, but it is when you essentially make no money. So $20 is a big, huge deal. And those same jeans that I paid $20 for today are $8. Yeah, cool. Go me. But, I was able to sit back, realize that that wasn't a great deal, look at the receipt, understand that I didn't need to stock up because A, there may be better deals, or B, like, do we even need that? Is that a gift that someone else can give? Is, like, do I have to be the one doing that work? No, I certainly do not. And so that was really my great thing from this weekend, like recognizing in real time, not running away, not unacknowledging it, not pretending like it isn't happening, like recognizing in real time that I was starting to spin, and allowing myself to be real enough to say, hey, you're spinning, let's just slow down. Let's remove ourselves from the situation. Let's not keep going there. Like, how do we save ourselves from that moment? So that's really my great thing. And I think it really takes you allowing yourself to be that person, right? It's okay that I enjoy all of those things. This is good. It's good to enjoy life, I'm saying. But, right? We have to like stay in control. We can't just spin like I was starting to. So that's a huge growth for me. So I feel awesome about that. Okay. Take time today, recognize yourself for your great things. There are things that you're going to grow from that may not seem like big wins, like me returning a $20 pair of jeans, seemingly insignificant, but huge. As I just talked you through it, huge growth. And I want you to recognize the fullness of all of your great things. You know, why is this a great thing, even though it may seem minute to someone else? Why is this a big deal to you? Because sometimes when we don't address and connect with the deepness of why that's a great thing, the deepness of the growth patterns that shows, we kind of just go through the motions. So if your great things is becoming like very dry and check the box, like I did my great thing, I want you to dig a little bit deeper. Make sure that you're connecting that growth pattern. Go deeper, really think about it. You don't have to say it all out loud. You don't have to write it all, right? But like, make sure that you're making that connection, because sometimes that can transition and help you grow the practice. Definitely, if you're feeling like, oh yeah, I got this down, you can start to probably add in some intensity of the practice, and that can look like what I just did. Let's go ahead and connect the growth pattern there, right? Or is it something that would have triggered you before? Like, talk through that. Why is this a great thing today? What is the significance? Why is this better than 3 months ago? Why is this better than a year ago? Go ahead and depth it a little bit. Let's get some depth in there to your great thing. Let's go. Okay. So today we're talking about, so all weekend, and it was funny because my husband and I were driving and he's like, what are you thinking about? And now he can recognize when I'm like deep in thought and nowhere near him, right? And like I'm sitting physically right by him, but my mind is like thinking about just something so deep within myself that I am 3 miles away from him. So he's like, what are you thinking about? I'm like, oh, do you really want to know? He's like, yeah. I'm like, well, here's my thought. We're talking about if my work, right, the death of a dream, this podcast, if it's more of a sociology issue, right, and research and study, or is it more of a psychology issue? So in my mind, as I'm sitting here in the car while you're driving, I'm thinking about, is the response to the death of your dream social? Is the response to the death of your dream psychology, right? And, you know, to me, it feels psychological in this realm of dreams are specifically tied to narratives. And so I guess this is what I want to start proving. It's like, it isn't just, right, your social response. It's so behavior based. And when we cross over into behavior based, that really feels more like psychology to me. And so that's what I've been thinking about. And that's what I'm really thinking about. And so him and I had this debate of like, well, really everything stems from money. But then I start to challenge that because I'm like, if I'm really studying, like, I don't think people who have money necessarily chase their dreams. And why? Right? Because they have every opportunity. I've spoken to a lot of people who are much better off than me, who were financially in a better position to take a risk like this and haven't. And so what's the difference? What is the X factor? That's what I wanted to know. That's what I've always wanted to know. And I decided to use myself as my first case study because I had kind of went along asking these questions of people like, oh, did you always want to be a secretary? Oh, did you always want to be a nurse? Like, what led you here, right? And a lot of people are living their lives led by the default, right? And so I started to explore that, or started to just ask those questions, not in a like study participant type way that I'm talking about now, more as just a openly curious, why do you have those dreams? And so for me, when I started to explore my own story, I realized that I had the most, I had went around talking to people about their dreams, but I didn't really have any of my own. I had some, right? But they were pretty weak. And so when I start to explore my own story, I start to cross over and examine, is privilege the reason that I went wrong, right? Like, did I have too much access but not enough? Like, am I in that middle ground where you really just have to accept default because you don't have enough to make it and you have too much to kind of bypass everything and be like a Cinderella story? And so that's kind of where I got lost. And so to me, that really was a constant narrative that was kind of preached early on to me. So when we start to ground ourselves there, and so these are all the things that I'm talking through with my husband, and certainly he stops listening at some point because no one really has an interest in this. Certainly you probably have stopped listening as well. But this morning I woke up and I've been reading more on empathy and trying to deepen my connection with my empathetic nature. And I think a lot of that trauma, the loss of my empathy, came from just adulthood, my response to adulthood, but also from my childhood. And so today I want to kind of explore soul loss. And everything that I say on this podcast really probably is over dramatized because I am an empath. And so, like, I just trust I feel things deeper than most. If you've ever spoken to me, you probably realize this. If you've ever seen me coach or play a sport, or it's a lot. I'm a lot. Okay. So when I was reading today about retrieving your inner child and the importance of going back, and a lot of times creatives talk about the inner child and rediscovering that person and really finding that work. I found that finding my inner child was not only something that I needed to do in order to tap into creativity, but it was something that I had to do in order to fully understand my story and how I got here, right? Because we can kind of bypass all of that and be like, oh, we were young, we didn't know anything. But once you explore that pain point, those pain points, usually they're deeper in their setting, right? And that emotional trauma over time develops and grows, and we tie it to different things, but usually there are clues, and usually they're all tied back to like that one instance. And so in the book that I'm reading, which is called lovingly, I Don't Want to Be an Empath Anymore, and that's by Ora North, she's talking about this idea that you got hurt somewhere, and at that point you decided if you could survive like that anymore or if you couldn't. And that's essentially soul loss. And so when I think about how that works with the death of your dream, that moment, if it was traumatic enough, and like for me, it was so many layers of loss all at the same time that it was extremely traumatic. And, for anyone who was going to move out to California, and then maybe they had a child that was unexpected, or, fill in the friggin' blank, right? So soul loss is what happens, and this is reading directly from I Don't Want to Be an Empath Anymore. Soul loss is what happens when a soul experiences trauma and a piece of the soul fractures and breaks off to protect itself from the pain of that trauma. And so for me, right, that was not dreaming big. It was too scary, especially in that moment, especially in that death of a dream moment. And I think sometimes, and I love the way that she talks about that, it just breaks off. Like you just lose it. But eventually, right, we have to go rediscover that energy, because it is energy. It's a source. The piece of the soul that fractures contains a vital energy that is necessary for the wholeness of the human life. So we can't just pretend like it never happened and cover it up and never come back to it, right? No matter what it is, whatever that point was. And for me, the death of my dream was just so scary and so sad and depressing that I just never wanted to go back to it. Like it just didn't happen. We're good here. But the moment that I did, right, and I had to, because I felt like there was something not whole in my life anymore. The second that I did, I could start acknowledging and healing from that. And what I discovered is that it wasn't even that moment at 19, right? It was a moment at 7. And that moment at 7 really allowed me to trace back all of my steps and to realize exactly where I let go of that piece of me. Where did it die, and start to heal and bring it back. And she does go on to talk about how that moment in time, right, we get stuck. And so when we go back and we find that piece of our soul, that piece of our soul really is whatever age that happened, because we broke it off and we never grew it with us. And so I think that we have to consider that those moments are going to have happened in time. And as we continue to nurse and grow them, it's going to take more work. And the younger that it happened, the deeper the trauma and the less growth and light that piece of our soul has gotten. And so even all of the growth, if we haven't brought it along with us, right, we haven't been nurturing it the same way that we've been nurturing everything else, it definitely needs a lot more time. And so I think I feel so deeply about exploring those moments and knowing that if we don't go back to wherever that hurt, that loss, that death of a dream, if we don't go back there, right, and we don't want to because it just hurt. And I think the scarier thing, honestly, is that we're scared that we're blaming people who probably don't deserve it, right? Sometimes. But I still think that it's necessary. And it's not that you're going to write them a letter and send it to them and tell them, right? You don't have to go down that process, but I do think you have to start processing it. You have to start talking through it, whether it's writing, whether it's, X, Y, and Z, whatever that looks like for you to heal and process. But the biggest piece is acknowledging that somewhere along the line, right, your soul died, a little piece, right? And I get it, right? We're taught that it has to be this traumatic moment where we came back, but I think no matter what, if you didn't get a chance to live your dream out as you imagined it, there was trauma there and a piece of your soul broke off. And it's time to start healing that, right? And so that's what I'm talking about. As I'm starting to explore whether this is social or psychology, I keep bouncing back and forth between the two. It's such a broad idea, but it is so based in trauma and loss and narratives that we assign after loss, and that those narratives impact our behavior, that therefore impact our identity and our association with our identity. And so much of our identity is caught up in how we dream. And so I think deepest acknowledgement and movement is really looking at that loss of soul. And so much of that work can be done exploring where your dream died. Like, even go deeper than the obvious, right? The obvious one for me was not becoming a Division I athlete. As I continued to trace that back, is that the deepest, right? And so what I discovered is that early on, at 7, I assigned myself these false narratives. And so those narratives informed an entire lifetime of decisions that really weren't up to me. And so the exploration of that, the bringing of that piece of my soul to regain that energy, the bringing of that back really took disassembling and talking through that kind of darkness, that shadow side, that moment in time that really struck me, right? And so there are these deep, dark portions of my soul that were still living back in that moment. The only way to recover from that really is walking myself through those moments and not avoiding them anymore. And for me, avoidance wasn't blatant anxious, right? Sorry, anyone who's on camera here. We're having some power issues. I gotta get the power back on. Okay. So reset. Here we go. So anyone who's struggling, right? And you're feeling loss, or you're feeling loss of energy or passion or whatever, I want you to start thinking about soul loss as a whole. Where has your soul experienced trauma? Where did a piece of that person die? How do we get them back? And one of the most revitalizing ways for me was to start just talking that story out, right? Talking it out, writing it out, experiencing that, talking with other people who have experienced that, a similar experience to mine, starting to do work with that, because it's always been something that I've been interested in. But more than anything, it was, finding what those misguiding narratives were and helping to disrupt and disprove them. And so a lot of us are just guided by narratives, and they're either positive ones or negative ones. And a lot of times, if we have built narratives from a trauma point, right? And that's what we're talking about. The soul loss is from trauma. If we've built narratives from that trauma point, there's a chance that our lives have been misguided, right? I know that sounds really scary and it sounds so dramatic, and I promised you at the beginning of this that it would be, because we don't mess around here. Like, the title of this podcast is The Death of a Dream. If there's a more dramatic title, I haven't heard it and I don't want to. Okay? We go all in, all the way in. It's dramatic and it is meant to be. Because I think without acknowledging that moment as that dramatic, it's hard to fully understand and process that there was trauma that was done in that moment. And there was. Think about it. Think about when you realized, like the exact moment. I want you to call yourself into your body at the exact moment where you realized that whatever you had planned wasn't going to happen. What was going through your head? What did you tell yourself every day after that to make it okay? What are you still doing to make it okay? How are you coping with the trauma of that moment? Right? Think about it. And the deeper the loss, the more trauma that your soul experienced, because dreams are your soul, right? They're your passion. Those things don't come from your head, they come from your heart, which means if somewhere that broke, if somewhere you were told no and you had to take the no, like there was no other option, then a piece of you died, right? And I want us to start thinking about how we bring that person back to life, and it has to be that extreme. It does, because you're going on a rescue mission. Rescue mission? Wow. You're going on a rescue mission of yourself prior, of yourself currently, and that takes a whole lot of acknowledgement that you have been hurt. And it doesn't even have to come from a person. It doesn't even have to come from any one single action. I want you to retrace all of that. And yes, we're acknowledging that the death of your dream broke a piece of your soul. But we can't just leave it broken and floating around, right? We have to regain that energy. We have to bring that piece of our soul back into play. We can't keep that piece on the bench forever. It is vital. This is not a professional podcast. Welcome. We've sneezed. We've gotten all up in charges today. We have laughed. We have grown. We got serious. Then we had to call ourselves back and remember that we're not even all that serious or professional. Like, welcome. This is real. This is me. This is how this podcast is supposed to work. And no matter how many people try to get me to clean it up and to edit out sneezes and to fix it, like, I just want you as the listener to get to experience the fullness of who I am as a person. Sneezes, giggles, laughs, saying words backwards once in a while. Like, let's just go there. We don't live in a perfect world, and it would be crazy for me to present myself as that, because I'm not, and no one is. So you get the sneezes, you're welcome. You get the giggles, you're welcome. You get the words rescue mission, right? Or rescue mission, whatever that was supposed to be. Either way, you get real, raw experiences. But today I want us to start processing that pieces of your soul are floating around, and you owe it to yourself to regain the energy from those pieces. Start to heal them, start to process them as a trauma, right? As a soul loss, and start to discover all the places that happened, and start the road to the healing of that trauma. As always, you're smart, you're strong, you're beautiful. What are you going to do? Change the world.